is no longer inside me.
Smile for the camera.
Who invited you?
Welcome to part 2 of my 5-part series, going through every single world in Duel Links individually, from the OG Duel Monsters world up to Dark Side Dimensions, and hopefully Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexa when it arrives, covering every single character's level up rewards and skills to give you guys a general rating of each character so you know who you should be grinding and what cards to look out for. Now if you haven't seen part 1, I highly suggest doing so first, and I'll leave a link to that video at the top of the description, as that video is going to be the biggest one of the series as it covers the biggest world, the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. This video will be covering Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, the second biggest world. Now for those of you that haven't seen the first guide, I'll go through my rating system once again. If you have seen the first guide, feel free to skip ahead a little bit, as this will just be a flat out copy and paste from the original video. I'll be judging each character based on two things: their rewards and their skills. Now important to note, I will only be judging cards that are only obtainable via level up. So for example, Arcana has Magician's Rod, which is a pretty good card, but it's also obtainable from the card trader. So it's not something I'll consider in this guide, as you don't actually have to level Arcana to actually get the card. Also important to note, I won't be judging cards based on how fun I think they are. I'll purely be basing them on how strong they are, or if I think they have future potential, which is different to how I look at the skills. The skills will be separated into two categories: fun and viable. Viable in this sense is any skill that is used actively, or was used actively to an extent in any particular deck, or at least has the potential to be used in the future. And fun is any skill that's not really relevant but is still fun to play, such as the God card skills. Also important to note, I will not be reviewing based on shared skills, as there is no point to me reviewing a character based on grit, balance, or ties that binds, as all these kinds of skills are obtainable on a large portion of the characters, and really shouldn't be the main selling point of a character, as you most likely will be attaining these skills eventually anyway, or at least unlock a character that has access to them without having to do very much. If anything, this guide should be a way of you deciding which of the Ties That Binds characters is worth your time grinding. Some skills on this guide, like Life Cost 0, are shared, as you will see, but I've left it to a limit of 4 characters max per skill, as these skills are still really exclusive and should still be counted as selling points for a character. I will put all these factors into account and give you a ranking on each character, from S tier down to F tier. And without further ado, let's get into it. Also, just a heads up, if you do like this kind of content I'm producing and you want me to produce more of it, please consider subscribing or leaving a like, comment, all that kind of stuff, as it really does help. This kind of stuff does take a lot longer to make than my normal content, like a lot longer. As of this video, I've already done 36 different infographics for this series, and we are only up to part 2. So yeah, if you like this video, please feel free to leave a like, subscribe, comment, all that kind of stuff. Starting us off with a decent start, we have Zane Truesdale, B tier. Zane is the Cyber Dragon character. If you want to play Cyber Dragon, you will need to unlock Zane for his skill, Cyber Style. Cyber Style has been nerfed a ridiculous amount of times since its release, but it's still considered the best skill for the deck, and that deck itself is still considered pretty damn good. In terms of other skills, Zane has Master of Fusion, which is a fantastic skill for any kind of fusion deck, and Cyber Dark Style, which is a skill that is pretty decent for searching Cyber Dark monsters, which isn't really a meta-relevant deck at the moment, but you do see it cog every month. Zane also comes with the skill Fatal 5, which is one of the few alternative win conditions that isn't just making your opponent's life point 0, and Power Bond, which has an absurd life point cost for a fun OTK fusion deck. But these skills are definitely just fun alternative win cons, rather than viable skills at the moment. His level up rewards do let Zane down a bit though, with there only being 2 cards to look out for: Cyber Dragon Dre and Future Visions. Both these cards are not really that usable in any decks at the moment, outside of Dre in some more free-to-play Cyber Dragon decks, but both do have a great amount of future potential, especially Dre, with Xyz just around the corner. Next up, we got the only character in the game to have a set of wings. Yubel, C tier. Sadly, this character doesn't have any decent level up rewards to look forward to, but does make up for that in the skill department. Although none of the skills are currently that meta relevant, there are quite a few decent options. Right Back At You has seen some play in the past, along with Compensation, but sadly that skill was nerfed rather harshly. Love is Pain could become a fantastic counter skill if burn decks ever take off, And My Name is Yubel is the best skill for any Yubel deck, which is another one of those decks that isn't really that meta relevant, but you do see it from time to time. And at least, it's a very great farm deck. Painful Evolution and I'm Always Near You are two other Yubel orientated skills, but are definitely not your best options for that deck. Allure by Darkness is currently the only way for us to use the card Allure of Darkness in Duel Links, but that card, although decent, is definitely not worth waiting the activation requirement of this skill, nor is it worth skipping your normal draw for. But it is still fun to mess with in any dark deck, especially if your monsters enjoy being banished. Now to complete the Dino collection, we have Tyranno Hassleberry, C tier. Now I really wanted to rate this guy a D for Dino DNA, but I couldn't, as this guy gets hard carried by the potential of double evolution pill, which although isn't very usable right now due to a severe lack of decent Dino boss monsters in the game, I will give it at least a 90% chance that this card will one day be considered top tier or at least very viable. Outside of that though, the character doesn't have a whole lot going for him, with the majority of his skills being rather weak. The Dino Within is a skill that interests me a little bit, as with the right target down the line it could be something worth watching, but as of now it isn't very usable. And just like the last guide with Rex, I decided to include Jurassic World despite me personally thinking the skill is quite bad. It is just played quite a lot in the current Dino decks, so I feel obliged to at least include it as viable. He does have a bunch of other Dino orientated skills, including one with the Dino, which is technically an alternative win con, but for your opponent, but none of them are at all viable. Next up we have everyone's favourite roid user, Syrus Truesdale, C tier. Syrus has a problem that a lot of the GX characters actually share. Basically, his level up rewards are all farmable. He doesn't have a single unique reward, making them all basically useless. Thankfully though, Syrus does have a decent amount of skills to make up for it. My Monster cards, although recently nerfed, is still a pretty decent skill for trying to get particular cards in your opening hand, and Master of Fusion, as stated earlier, is a fantastic skill for any fusion deck. Fusion Reserve Roids is probably the best skill for any Roid deck, which are not really that viable at the moment, but if they do get more support, this would probably be the skill to use. And for those who do enjoy playing Roids, Syrus does have a whole bunch of other suboptimal skills for you to mess around with. Next up, we have a character for those of you that enjoy literal cheating, Sartorius Kumar, C tier. Card reward wise, Sartorius has Fiend Comedian, which probably wouldn't see any play outside of Sartorius due to it being a coin flip card, but that's basically his specialty, and it is often used in Sartorius decks to fill up the quota required for his most popular skill, Master of Destiny. A lot of you probably recognise this skill from Desperado decks, where it is essentially used to guarantee all of your coin tosses land on heads. And that deck used to be considered top tier, and you still see that deck every now and then, especially when a new machine deck is added to Duel Links. If you do enjoy messing around with coin flip decks though, Arcana does offer a whole bunch of other skills for the Arcana Force archetype that are all generally aiming to rig the coin toss each of the archetypes monsters have, outside of 3 Lord Pillars, which can be used as a pretty fun way to special summon the archetype's boss monster. Outside of that though, Sartorius doesn't really offer a whole lot, so if you don't plan to play Desperado, you should probably skip this character. Next up we have my vote for the worst voice in the game, Jesse Anderson, C tier. If you can somehow manage to stand listening to this character for more than 2 minutes, you can get a hold of the majority of the Crystal Beast archetype. Sadly though, just like our Roid buddy, other than Crystal Bond, which is one of the better cards for Crystal Beasts, a lot of his level up rewards can simply be farmed, and those that aren't are just simply bad anyway. Transcendent Crystals is the best skill for Crystal Beast, but was recently nerfed due to it being abused in other decks, which definitely hurt the skill a lot, and considering how bad Crystal Beast is an archetype already, that didn't really help its case. Jesse also has Crystal Power, which is a skill that can be used in any deck that relies on continuous spells, such as Fire Fist, as well as the skill Fairy Smile, which is great for fairy decks. As for fun skills, Jesse has Meet My Family, which is basically the skill that you use if you want to have the biggest deck size possible in Duel Links, as it adds 8 extra cards to your main deck, meaning you have a max of 38 cards. Granted, all 38 cards are really bad, but still, if you want an extreme grass is greener, here's the skill for you. Jumping now from mediocre to one of the 2 S ranks from the world, Jaden Yuki. Card reward wise, you can't really ask for much more. It gives you Masked Hero Blast and Form Change, which are both really powerful cards, and if you keep up with the current top tier hero decks, are pretty popular cards, especially Blast, considering it turns Elemental Hero Stratos into a Mask Change target. Viable skill wise, Jaden has quite a few. Neospace adds quite a substantial attack buff to any Neos Fusion deck. Fusion Time is basically the same as Master of Fusion, but has a buff if used with elemental heroes. And Ultimate Fusion is currently the only way we have access to the extremely powerful card, Super Polymerization. Sadly though, this skill isn't really usable at the moment, as we don't really have a consistent method to pop the life point requirement to use the skill, and not really a whole lot of decks that can actually use the card anyway. But I think this card definitely has a bit of future potential. Fun skill wise, if you enjoy playing Elemental Hero, especially Neos, there are quite a few options here, including Together Again, which can help you combine Neos decks with Duel. Moving on now to this character's disappointing counterpart, we have Jaden Yuki, C tier. The only real viable card reward I saw here was Card Trooper, which currently doesn't actually see any play, but maybe down the line if we get some kind of Earth graveyard orientated decks and Block Dragon picks up in popularity, maybe you would see a tiny bit of play, but that might be a stretch. Skill wise, he's very similar to his counterpart, having both Neo Space and Fusion Time for viable skill options, as well as a whole bunch of other elemental hero skills including Miracle Draw, which gives you access to one of the most well-known cards in the whole of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pot of Greed. Sadly though, this skill isn't all that great, as it just takes too long to come into effect. Next up, we have another contender for the most annoying voice in the game, and our lowest tier yet, Vellian Crowler, D tier. The only real reward this guy offers is Ancient Gear Box, which can kinda be used in the Fusion variant of Ancient Gear, but sadly, that variant isn't really that usable in Duel Links right now, and this card doesn't see any play in the more standard Ancient Gear lists. Crowler does have Middle Age Mechs, which is definitely the best skill for Ancient Gear, which is another one of those decks that gets COG every month, but isn't considered top tier anymore. But outside of this skill, Crowler has absolutely nothing, and considering you unlock this skill at level 4, there is never a reason to really grind this guy. Teacherly Disciple is an interesting skill that can be used to try and ruin your opponent's top decks, but its activation requirement is a bit too harsh for how weak the skill actually is. Basically, if you don't want to play Ancient Gear, don't bother unlocking this guy, and if you do play Ancient Gear, don't bother with this guy's level up rewards past level 4. Continuing the train of garbage, we have Chazz Princeton, D tier. Chazz is built all around trying to make Ojamas playable, which sadly, they are just not. Maybe if more support was added to the game, this guy might go up a tier, but I doubt it. The only skill I was really considering viable on him is Land of the Ojamas, as it's probably the best skill for Ojama, but considering Ojama themselves are pretty unplayable, this skill is also kinda screwed. He does have a few other interesting Ojama skills that aim to give your opponent tokens, which can be a tad annoying, but the skills are either just too weak or have too high of a requirement to actually be usable. Dragonic Fusion is the only other noteworthy skill on this character, but since Dragon's Mirror is actually an obtainable card now, there isn't really a use for this skill, especially considering that Dragon's Mirror isn't even played at the moment. Similar to his skills, most of Chazz's level up rewards are based on Ojamas, making them rather average. Ojama Mass Simulation and Fitting Room are both pretty good cards, especially Fitting Room considering it can be played outside of Ojamas, but they are both nothing to get too excited over and are definitely not meta relevant. Next up, we have what I would consider the most disappointing character release for this world, Blair Flannigan, C tier. This character had a lot of potential to be awesome, as they were meant to be the Light Sworn character, but for some reason, although Konami gave them a bunch of Light Sworn related card awards, they decided to just spam release Maiden in Love skills for this character, and by spam release, I mean spam. After several events, we now have 5 different Maiden skills, which although can be kind of amusing, especially considering Happily Ever After lets you just kinda marry 2 of your monsters, they are all completely unplayable. The character does have 2 generically viable skills though in Holy Guard and Fairy Smile, but that's about it. In terms of level up rewards, they did give us a bunch of playable cards that although not terrible, weren't exactly amazing either, with none of them actually making it into the Light Sworn deck outside of Raikou. Speaking of disappointing, we got another D, Bastion Misawa. Most of Bastion's rewards are based around chem critters, which I'm not gonna lie, I've never actually tried to explore, nor have I ever actually played against someone who's tried using the archetype itself, which to be honest, if I haven't seen anyone play it in game, that's a really bad sign, because I've played a lot of Duel Links. The only two cards that seemed at least a little decent down the line is Carbo Crab as a generic searcher in the future for Gemini based decks, and Carboneddon in any self-milling deck that needs to search for a particular level 7 or lower dragon normal monster. Skill wise, he has no viable options, and honestly I put a whole list of fun skills that all just give you field spells that grant certain attributes a buff while debuffing others, but none of these skills are really that fun to use or do anything that unique. Finally, climbing out of the dumpster, we have our second S-rated character, Aster Phoenix. Card reward wise, just like Jaden/Yubel, you cannot ask for more. He gives us 3 Destiny Hero cards, all of which have been top tier at one point, if not currently. Destiny Draw is used in every single Destiny Hero deck to ever exist. Malicious is ridiculous in any hero deck that can send cards to the grave, which, if you've been keeping up with the top tier hero decks, is very easy thanks to Vision Hero Vion. And this can make for an easy mask change target, or simply fusion material. Plasma is one of the best anti-meta cards in the game, as it literally just negates all monster effects, and it can fit into any deck that can flood the board, not just hero decks. I will admit though that putting Plasma in this guide was a bit of a bait considering he's only generally played at a 1-of thanks to the skill Bring It, and you can obtain one in Aster's starter deck right as you unlock him, so it is an exclusive level up, but only in terms of getting a second copy. Speaking of the skill Bring It, this skill is insane, and is what allows Plasma to be used wherever you please, as it can simply be used at any time to add Plasma to hand, as long as you meet the life point requirement, which is simply just 1 Cosmic Cyclone activation. Aster is also an owner of the skill Master of Fusion, as well as 2 extra Destiny Hero skills for you to mess with, but I don't recommend ever trying Destroyer of D, that'll give you a headache. And finally, we have one of my favourite characters in the game, Alexis Rhodes, A tier. Card reward wise, she offers Cyber Petite Angel, which is basically a Manju for Cyber Angels, and one of their best cards. She also offers Edaton, but this is kind of a bait considering she is nowhere near as exclusive as she used to be, especially considering she's now offered up as a reward in multiple events, including the current event happening as I'm recording this video. But if none of those events are happening, this is the only method to obtain her, outside of maybe some special ticket. In terms of viable skills, she has 2 of the best skills available to Ritual decks, with both Master of Rites for consistency and Master of Rites 2 for protection against monster effects. She's also the last owner of the skill Master of Fusion. As for fun skills, if you are a fan of Cyber Angels like me, you can mess around with Blessing of the Cyber Angel. Alright guys, that's it for this part of the guide. Let me know if you want me to continue this little mini-series through all the different worlds in Duel Links, and just a reminder, this takes a lot of work to make. Much more than my general upload. So if you do want me to do more content like this, consider subscribing and liking this video, so I know it's worth the effort I put in.
Hey, big brother, can I watch SpongeBob?
Shut up, Mokuba. I'm busy flagging YouTube videos to compensate for the fact that I have an extremely small penis.
Oh.